Hello, BookTube. I'm here to do a tag for once on Tuesday. Recently, I've been tagged in a few tags, and this one is the mispronunciation word slash name tag or name slash word tag. And it was created by Alan at Big Hard Books and Classics. It's just sort of, names or places that are commonly mispronounced. And some to me are very understandable because it is kind of weird, like for especially when you're trying to pronounce something from another language, where sometimes either syllables that go together or consonants or vowels and syllables that put together, say in one language, uh, and you're trying in your native speaking English, you don't have that sound, so it's sometimes really hard to get that sound from it, and vice versa. Uh, Non-English speakers to try to get the English sort of sound of combination of words, and it doesn't help when the way it's spelled, that it just does not sound that way when you say it. However, there are times where it's really weird. English people, a lot of times, the words right there or the name, and they mispronounce it, and all they had to do was say it, and they add or create another sound that's not even close to it, and that freaks me out. Um, but there's a lot of things, like I used to, in Canada. I never knew anybody who, well, for most of my life, I never knew anybody that was actually from the UK, English, Scottish, Welsh, whatever. I never really knew anybody for a long time, but I watched a lot of British movies, English movies, read a lot of books that were written by English people, Welsh or Scottish, even Irish or whatever, the whole sort of British Isles. And I'd see that I'd watch something and they would talk about Leicester Square, a place called Leicester. Yeah, perfectly fine. And then I'm reading and I see a word. It's Leicester, because it was a hard C. And that, and then I never connected the two. Why would I ever connect the two? And then finally, I think it was when I came to the UK here that I found out that these were different places and spelled different. I never actually looked up on a map. I don't think I ever did. I did because I wouldn't have thought to, and I never. And if I did look at the map, I would see Leicester, and then I would see, maybe if I did look in London, I'd see Leicester Square. Lots of squares. Bedford Square. Like, you just name it. Like, there's all sorts of squares. So it's hard to combine the two. Uh, and but it is very weird. And like, well, Mark at Booktime and Elvis did this too. And because a lot of people, the accents will change sometimes the pronunciation of words as well. And Mark used the thing of, Edinburgh. Uh, Edinburgh people do it. But when somebody starts, laughing at my accent or my pronunciation of things, I will say, Edinburgh, and that really confuses them. um, but it's weird because even English people here in the UK a lot of times cannot pronounce the names. I live in Bedfordshire. It's pronounced pronounced Bedfordshire, but spelled Bedfordshire. But then you get something and they call it the Shires. So that even confuses people more. But I'll talk to someone in a call center somewhere else in the UK, and they'll say, "Oh, you live in Bedfordshire," and it's like, "No, it's Bedfordshire." And they go, "Oh, it says here Bedfordshire." Yeah, but it's pronounced Bedfordshire or Beds. The English language has a propensity to contract things, and that kind of bugs me. And there's a few things like that that really really bug me. It's like there for a time, sometime instead of saying pizza, they'd say za. Like, what is a za? Or there's one that really really bugs me now is in it. There's just things like that they're pet peeves for things like this. Or you get not just non-English people like Americans or Canadians generally speaking that obviously speak English or a form of English that we do. I'm a Canadian, so I say it's a form of English. Norfolk, and you see so many times they'll say Norfolk because it's spelled Norfolk. And near me here, there's a place called Peterborough. But again, it's like Edinburgh. It's Peterborough. But where I come from in Canada, there's a place called Peterborough. Spelt exactly the same way. So in my mind, to call the place that's near here Peterborough is wrong pronunciation. But if you're in Canada and you pronounce Peterborough as Peterborough, that's wrong pronunciation. And I know people will differ with me, and say that I'm wrong, but no, that's correct. It's like people's names, the way they pronounce them. If this is how that person and their family has pronounced that name forever, that is the way they pronounce it. That's the correct pronunciation for them. And a lot of times names do get like for in North America they'll sort of get anglicized because it's easier to and the spelling too. Just thinking of a Swedish director that I really like, silent film director, Victor Seastrom. Sorry, just screwed up there. Victor Seastrom. Anyway. It's like SJ and all this, but they Americanized it or anglicized it to Seastrom. That's not quite the correct pronunciation of it. And other times here, like when I talk to some people and they say, "Oh," like talking with Charles Chaplin, and they'll say, "Oh, I like the actress Edna Purviance." Who? And it's like Edna Purviance. It is as far as I know, because every time I've heard her name pronounced, it's Edna Purviance. And yeah, it's just names, but then you get really really strange things. Like there's a place in London that is spelled. It's it's one word, but it's South and Wark, Wark. So you'd think it's South Wark, but it's Suffolk. I can't even do it correctly because the sound doesn't sound natural. It's not Suffolk, like for Suffolk, Suffolk or Norfolk. It's Southwark, something like that, and it's like it's so bizarre because until you hear it, you will never know. I grew up in a place on an island in northern Ontario, and there's lots of archaeology. There's lots of Native North American archaeological sites, and there's still even now there's still reserves there, and there's a lot of Indian names, Native Indian names, like all through North America. Some of them have changed in their pronunciation over time, but there's a place, one archaeological sort of type site, a really old archaeological site. And when I went to university, the teacher was talking about, oh, this would be interesting. I'd like to know more about this because I used to live like within a couple miles of it when I was a kid. And he says, oh, this place called Shagunda. Where is that? Like I'm scratching my head and going, Shagunda. I never heard of that. So, and then when he gave out a piece of paper and I saw the spelling and it's like, oh, Shagawinda. And I told him that's the pronunciation. That's people to pronounce. I don't know if that was the correct, in Ojibwe. Uh, that I don't know if that was the correct pronunciation, but that was the pronunciation there. Was Shagawinda, and it's like he just still didn't believe me, and he just continued saying Shagunda. Continued mispronouncing it. So I don't know if it was like common through all archaeology that it was mispronounced, which kind of hard to believe, but there's all sorts of things like that, and also too the interesting thing about mispronunciation, because some people get on a high horse about mispronunciation, um, and it's sometimes a lack of education at times, but most of the time it's because you see it in print, and like I said, that Southwark, Suffolk, you know, who would ever in their wildest dreams would not pronounce it as Southwark if you've never heard it or nobody's told you and you see it on print. But there are times, and like I'm not going to use too many examples of this, but there are times that there's words that people see and they won't pronounce it. Like, say, for instance, it was pronounced Southwark, and they used the pronunciation Suffolk. Totally wrong, because I don't know where they would create that, and that's what it almost seems like that somehow it happened. But there's other pronunciations. Like I used to work for a health service, so people would call up, and one of the first calls I got was, you ask them what the problem is, and they said, they have a sore tooth. Sitting there going like this, thinking in my mind, tooth. It's a tooth. And, so I asked you a question. Okay, you have some pain. Where's this pain? Well, it's my tooth and my moof. And it dawned on me that he's saying tooth and mouth. So, because wherever he was, that was the pronunciation of tooth. So pronunciations, like literally in England here, it can be like 2 miles away and totally different pronunciation. But a few things that I found that it has to have something to do with the education. I don't know for sure, but a common mispronunciation that people cannot say here in the UK is the word specific. They will say Pacific as the ocean, the Pacific Ocean, but they mean specific. And the letter H, it's really weird, and it's sort of like, because you read stuff and people they'll say they'll drop their H's. So instead of saying hat, they'll say at, or elf for health or something like that. So I think people then overcompensate for that. So instead of saying H for the letter H, H, they'll say H, like hey, H. And when I first came across that, I'm going, what letter is this? I was working at a bookstore. So they wrote it down. Oh, H. Yeah, H. And it's really weird. So there's lots and lots of words like that, and there are certain combinations, consonants here in the UK that, and I'm sure it's everywhere. It's totally everywhere in the world. But there's certain ones that there's certain areas of population, due to, I don't know, lack of correct education or proper education, they cannot pronounce these words this way. Like I say, the tooth, the tooth. Sorry for tooth. And then another one, like for authors, and it's like the one thing is like, I'll mention his name, Clifford D. Simak. Simak is the correct pronunciation. But 9 times out of 10, or well, maybe not that high, I'll hear CMAC. It's not CMAC, it's Simak. That's how he pronounced it. His ancestors, like his great-grandparent or his grandparents, were from Europe. I think they might have been from Czechoslovakia. I need to check that up. So they may have pronounced it differently there, but this was the pronunciation for generations once he's in the United States. So to pronounce it any other way is mispronouncing his name. And I don't understand, partially, when you see the word that you would say Simac. Like, to me, it's like the pronunciation would be Sim and then Ak. Sim-Ak. That would be natural. Now, let's go to a personal thing here I'll end on. My surname is spelled Standfast. Two words, very simple. I'm sitting down here, if I get up, I'm standing. Stand. And if you move quickly, it's fast. Put it together. Stand fast. And I don't know why, and it's not just people around me. My grandfather talked about having this problem. People will see the name spelt, they'll be right in front of them. They will say different things, and the most common is steadfast. How do you get stead for stand? So you say when you get up from a chair, I'm steading, not standing? That has always confused me. My grandfather apparently came up with something, or maybe it was his father. Like, it could have been generations and generations for centuries that could never figure out how to say the name. So the whole thing is like the joke is it's the opposite of sit slow, and I say that to people, and that just confuses them more. But yeah, it's just so my name is clearly Stand Fast, but here in England, a lot of times they'll get Stand Fast. They'll say Fast. There's no H in it. There's no ah in it. It's fast. But that's another. Well, I'll go back to this. Bath or Bath or what a lot of people in North America would call biscuit, like a muffin type thing. They call here, like some places it'll be scones and then scones, and there's the ancient argument what's correct, scones or scones. So that's what I mean. Sometimes some people get on a high horse and say, well, no, it's not Bath, it's Bath. And I had a trainer one time that refused to speak to anybody if they said glass. They had to say gloss. I'm going, there's no H in it. There's no H in the word. Or there's an H in bath, but Bath. It's you get this kind of trying to be superiority, and I think it's a differentiated the class structure here in England a little bit, or for part of it. And as I say, you get the regional accents, or the regional sounds for things. But yeah, it is a weird thing. It's an interesting thing, and I always you do smirk at times when I do hear people say, Norfolk, for Norfolk. But they probably just never heard it. But there are people that insist on doing that. It's like, but there is like there's okay. This is the other thing, the age old thing here. People make fun. Aluminium here in the UK and aluminum in North America, and they say that North America they're mispronouncing the word. No, they're not. They're spelled differently. You cannot, with the aluminum, you cannot pronounce that word correctly by saying aluminium. They're spelled differently. I've heard various stories of how that had changed, what happened there. And then there's obviously the differences in words, like there's gas. See, gas here is sort of like natural gas. And it's petrol, from petroleum. For gasoline in the States, so a contraction. But yeah, no, it's an interesting tag. But like I say, I don't fault people for pronouncing something the way it's spelled. That's the one thing, and because I do that as well, if I have not heard the word before, and the thing is, words have changed their pronunciation over time. So anybody who doesn't think that needs to sort of look into the words. Like in here in England, so many words have changed. Like we're talking almost within living memory that there has been complete changes and accepted, and it shows up in the dictionaries for pronunciation. So the accepted, it's now the correct pronunciation. So that's why if you go back 150 years anywhere, it might be difficult sometimes to understand what the person is saying. And today, 300 years in the future, they will have difficulty understanding us because words will change pronunciation. Not always, but they do. So it's an interesting thing. But the one that does get me though is like going back to my name is you get steadfast or you get stand fort. That's the other one that is common. Stand fort. Like I suppose I can understand that to a certain extent if it's written and the A sounds like looks like an O. But when it's printed out in letters, like typed out, I don't see how you can mispronounce that word. It always confuses me. The other thing is the spelling of things. My first name's Shawn. In emails all the time at work and stuff like that, they have to type in my name for it to pop up. But then they'll go, "Oh, dear SHAUN or SEAN." And it's like, that brings me to the word Shawn. I'm sure Jason Harrigan, if he ever watches this, can probably correct me on this, but there was an actress that used to be married to Peter O'Toole. Her first name is spelled SIAN. The pronunciation of that is Shawn. It's the feminine for Shawn. And that's mispronounced all the time. Like I never knew. I never heard anybody. So you'd think it'd be cyan. And the weird thing is, I one time spoke to a woman who was American. Her name was spelt that way, but they never knew. Her parents never ever knew that it was pronounced Shawn. So she pronounces her name as Cyan. Her name is Cyan, not Shawn. So to say that she's mispronouncing her own name, yeah, it's a little difficult to say that. But again, if you pronounce something the way it's spelled and you've never heard it, that's fine. But when it's spelled a certain way and people and you can pronounce it that way and that's the correct way, and even if it's the wrong way, but no, it's the correct way. But if they insist on adding different sounds that are not there without knowing that nobody has told them, like I say, the Suffolk in London, if you see that in print and start adding different sounds to that and you've never heard of it before, that is something that blows my mind. I don't understand that. And they'll and people will do it. There's something, I guess, in human psyche that does that for some people, and that just confuses me to no ends. But then to some people, they think you should know the pronunciation. And it's like, well, who would ever construct that pronunciation from those letter of word? It's like, well, we talked about on the live one time, the Welsh, the two L sounds. Who would ever think that wouldn't have an L sound when there's two L's? Yes, it's Welsh, but you probably have heard. Everybody has heard, but then you don't sometimes know, or people don't know that there's a Welsh language. That's the thing, because if you do hear it, it's, oh, that's a Welsh accent. Oh, that's a Scottish accent. Oh, that's an Irish accent. But they're still generally, for the most part, unless they speak these, the like Welsh or Irish or Scottish dialect, they are speaking English. So how would you ever think that that sound could come from those words, because they're speaking English? So yeah, it's a minefield. Pronunciation is a minefield. Don't even go to the fact of pronouncing non-English words. As I said at the beginning, it's that is just a minefield. Or names, in other languages, where some languages don't have enough. Welsh, there's not enough vowels. You get these long place names, and there might be three vowels in it, and it's like, how do you pronounce that? And it's thinking you're not used to it, because you're used to the sounds that your tongue makes, that you've spent, however, from birth to learn. So mispronunciation is humorous at times, but it can be hurtful to someone to laugh at them at their pronunciation, rather than take them aside. Ooh, that's actually pronounced this, and then if the person is addled enough, they'll go, oh, ooh, oops, because there's a lot of times that, like, there's words that I've been saying all the time that I've been saying wrong, and even because if I've never seen it, or I'm trying to pronounce, like I say, Leicester. And this is the thing. Oh, sorry, I keep going on, but I thought of something else. There's a sports team. I can't even remember whether it must be football, but there's there's the ancient race, the Celts, Celts, and this confused the hell out of me. I'm not into sports, but I think there's a football team called the Celtics. Why the heck is it Celtic? It should, like, I would think it would be Celtics. Makes no sense. Oh, one added thing in the last thing. Tomatoes. And it's pronounced here tomatoes. That confuses me, because then, okay, that's fair, that's fine, but then it should be potatoes for potatoes. But no, it's potatoes. So how do you get potatoes and tomatoes? If it was tomatoes and potatoes, makes perfect sense to me. So, in other words, I'm saying pronunciation, regardless of whether it's correct or wrong, makes no sense whatsoever. Thank you, BookTube.